Martha Carson's last breath had fogged the hospital window as she traced her wedding band one final time. "You'll keep living, Frank," she'd whispered. "For Polly." But when they lowered her casket into the frozen Alaskan ground 6 months after burying their boy, Frank buried his heart with her. Now, 5 winters later, the old ranger stood in his crumbling cabin, staring at the storm swallowing Pinecrest Hole. The radio warned of record-breaking cold, but Frank barely heard it. Something else demanded his attention, a sound cutting through the blizzard's wail. Not wind, not trees, a cry. The kind of sound he hadn't heard since the night Polly died trying to save that wolf. The blizzard didn't just rage, it hunted. Wind screamed through the valley like a wounded animal, tearing at Frank's cabin with icy claws. The old ranger turned from his window, his reflection in the glass showing a face as weathered as the mountains. His calloused fingers brushed Polly's graduation photo, the boy grinning in his too-big flannel, taken just 3 weeks before the fire. A sudden crash outside sent Frank reaching for his rifle. Not another falling tree. This was different, deliberate. Through the swirling snow, movement, small, desperate. A sound he knew in his bones, the high-pitched whine of a dying animal. The same sound Polly had made when no. Frank shoved the memory down as he yanked open the door. Frank Carson hadn't spoken to his reflection in years. What was left to say to the man who'd failed his family? At 67, his body told the story of a life lived hard, knees ruined by decades of snowmobile patrols, hands gnarled from pulling children from wrecked cars during the '98 freeze. The storm's icy fingers clawed at his exposed skin as he stumbled forward. That sound again, not wind through pines. A whimper, broken, young. Frank's boots punched through snowdrifts as he followed it to the clearing. What he found there wasn't just cruelty. It was a message. 2 wolf pups, barely weaned, dangling from a spruce branch like grotesque ornaments. Their matted fur was crusted with frozen blood. The storm's wail couldn't drown out the truth. This was no accident. Frank's knife sawed at the nylon ropes, his arthritic hands screaming in protest. The smaller pup, golden-eyed with a white chest patch, weakly lifted its head. Its gaze locked onto Frank's with eerie intelligence. The other pup, darker with a jagged scar across its muzzle, didn't move. Frank pressed 2 fingers to its throat. A pulse. Barely. His parka became their cocoon as he lifted them. The snow around the tree told another story, size 11 boot prints, just like Polly's, and fresh cigarette butts. Marlboro Reds, his boy's brand. Frank's blood turned to ice. Someone had wanted him to find these pups. Someone who knew. Kai, the name came unbidden, stirred against Frank's chest as they neared the cabin. Those golden eyes held something beyond animal instinct recognition. The pup's tiny claws gripped Frank's flannel like it knew this man's soul. Milo, the darker one, remained frighteningly still except for the shallow rise of his ribs. Frank kicked open his door, sending a framed photo of Martha crashing to the floor. He didn't notice. The pups came first now. As he knelt by the fire, Kai licked the salt from Frank's weathered cheeks. The old ranger froze. Tears? He hadn't cried since the funeral. Somewhere outside, a branch snapped. Too loud for wind. Frank's hand found his rifle. They were coming. For the pups. For him. For the ghosts of all he'd lost. Frank almost missed it. A tiny burlap pouch stitched beneath Kai's collar. Inside, a scrap of paper with 3 smudged words. "Forgive me, son." The same words Martha had whispered with her last breath. The cabin walls seemed to close in as Frank stared at the note. This wasn't random cruelty. It was personal. A shadow moved past the window. Frank grabbed his shotgun, the pups whimpering at the sudden movement. Outside, tire tracks cut through fresh snow. Someone had been here. Recently. The radio crackled to life on its own. Static giving way to a child's voice. "Daddy." Frank's blood ran colder than the storm. That voice hadn't been heard in 12 years. Not since Polly. Frank's boots crunched over frozen earth as he followed the trail of crimson droplets. Not wolf blood, human. The size 11 boot prints veered sharply toward the river, where the ice was thinnest. Kai whimpered against his chest, his golden eyes wide with something like warning. Frank's fingers brushed the note in his pocket. "Forgive me, son." Same words, same handwriting as the letter left on Polly's grave last winter. The wind howled through the pines, carrying another sound. An engine's growl. Close. Too close. Frank ducked behind a spruce as headlights sliced through the storm. The truck idled, its door creaking open. A boot hit the snow. Then another. The man stood tall in a parka slick with ice, his face hidden under a fur-lined hood. But Frank would know that stance anywhere, shoulders squared, right hand tucked near his hip. A hunter's posture. The stranger knelt, brushing snow from the blood trail. Kai trembled in Frank's arms. Then a flicker of steel. The man pulled a knife from his boot, its blade catching the moonlight. Frank's breath fogged the air. 12 years ago, he'd seen that same knife, sticking out of Polly's backpack. The stranger turned suddenly, staring straight at Frank's hiding spot. "Carson," he called, voice rough as gravel. "You always did love playing hero." The old dog's snarl ripped through the night before Frank could move. Duke, matted fur standing on end, charged from the cabin's porch, teeth bared. The stranger swore, swinging the knife. Frank surged forward, but he was too slow. The blade flashed. Duke yelped. Crimson splashed the snow. "No!" Frank's roar echoed off the mountains as Duke collapsed, his muzzle still curled in a growl. The stranger bolted for his truck. Milo, still weak, let out a sound Frank had never heard from a wolf. A scream. "Hi, human." The truck's tires spun in the snow as it vanished into the storm. Frank fell to his knees beside Duke. The dog licked his hand once, then stilled. Duke's body was still warm when Frank found it. A tiny key tucked beneath his frayed collar. The metal was icy, the teeth oddly shaped. Kai nosed at it, whining. Frank knew that key. Martha's. The one she'd worn around her neck the year she died. The one she'd said opened the box with all our ghosts. Inside the cabin, the floorboard under Polly's old bed groaned as Frank pried it up. The metal box was rusted shut. The key turned with a screech. Inside, a single Polaroid. Polly, age 14, standing beside a wolf pen at Grange Wildlife Company. His smile was forced, his eyes terrified. Scrawled on the back, "They made me do it, Dad." Static crackled from the old zenith as Frank stared at the photo. Then a voice. "Frank." Martha's tone soft as snowfall. The radio wasn't plugged in. Kai and Milo pressed against Frank's legs as the voice continued. "The sawmill. Look under the—" A gunshot exploded from the speaker. Frank recoiled. Silence. Then, faint but clear, "Forgive me, son." The same words, the same voice. Frank's hands shook as he grabbed his shotgun. The sawmill, where Polly had died, where the answers waited. Outside, the storm raged on. But now, Frank realized it wasn't just wind howling. Something was howling back. Frank's calloused fingers trembled as he held the Polaroid up to the kerosene lamp. Polly stood stiffly beside a chain-link fence, his two big flannel sleeves rolled up to show fresh scratches. Behind him, shadows moved in the cages, not wolves. Children. The date scrawled in the corner made Frank's stomach drop. June 17, 2011. The day before the fire. The day before Polly died. Kai whined, pawing at the box where another photo lay face down. Frank flipped it over. A wolf pup with golden eyes stared back. The spitting image of Kai. Written beneath, "Subject 17 reacts well to imprinting." The clinic door creaked open before Frank could knock. Vivian stood silhouetted in the doorway, her nurse's scrubs stained with blood that wasn't hers. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. Behind her, medical charts covered the walls, each labeled Grange Company with dates going back 12 years. She gripped Frank's wrist, her fingers ice cold. "They weren't just studying wolves, Frank. They were breeding them." With dash, a gunshot echoed in the distance. Vivian yanked him inside, bolting the door. "With what?" Frank demanded. She turned, tears cutting through the grime on her face. "With the orphans from St. Michael's. The ones nobody would miss." The sound stopped Frank mid-step as they crept toward the sawmill. Not wolf, not quite human, a chilling blend of both. Milo pressed against Frank's leg, trembling. Through the broken windows, shadows moved, upright but wrong, their movements jerky. Vivian's flashlight caught a glint of metal. Collars, thick and spiked, like something from a dogfighting ring. One figure turned suddenly. The beam illuminated a face Frank knew: Tommy Yurok, a foster kid who'd vanished the summer Polly died. But the eyes that locked onto Frank's weren't Tommy's anymore. They were yellow, and they recognized him. The sawmill office was exactly as Polly had left it, coffee mug still half full, the calendar frozen on June 2011. Frank's boot kicked something under the desk. A journal. The first page read, "Dad, if you're reading this, I messed up bad." Frank's vision blurred as he recognized his boy's messy handwriting. Dr. Grange said the shots would help me bond with the wolves. But subject 17, she talks to me. In my head. Vivian gasped over his shoulder. The next page was just scribbles. Wolf paws, equations, and over, they're making US kill. The final entry, I have to burn it all down. The charred remains of the wolf pens still smelled of gasoline and burnt fur after 12 years. Frank knelt, brushing snow from a metal plate. Subject 17, imprint successful. Kai sniffed at it and whined. Then Frank saw it. A child's sneaker, tiny and scorched, wedged under the fence. Size 6. Polly's size at 12. Something glinted inside. Frank pried it free. A dog tag stamped KAI 17. The same tag now hung around his wolf's neck. Vivian whispered, "Oh God." The realization hit them both. Kai wasn't just a wolf. He was Polly's. His final, terrible gift to the father who'd failed him. They came at dusk, shadows slinking from the tree line. Not just wolves. The hybrids. Their movements were wrong, too upright, too human. Frank counted 7 before losing track. Milo bared his teeth but didn't attack. Because he knew them. Vivian gripped Frank's arm as a massive gray wolf stepped forward, with Tommy Yurok's scar across its muzzle. It dropped something at Frank's feet, Polly's old hunting knife, crusted with blood. Then it threw back its head and spoke. He waits. The voice was guttural, mangled, but undeniably Tommy's. The pack parted, revealing a path into the woods, toward the caves, toward the truth. The stench hit first antiseptic and rotting meat. Frank's flashlight revealed rusted surgical tables, for stands tipped over like fallen soldiers. And the drawings, hundreds of them, covering the walls in child's hand. Wolves with human faces, men in lab coats with fangs. One stood out, a detailed sketch of Dr. Grange injecting a flailing boy, the caption reading, "Make US stronger." Vivian choked back a sob. Then Frank's light caught the back wall. 2 words, scrawled in what looked like blood, "Help US." And beneath it, smaller, "Love Polly." The journal was leather-bound, its pages filled with precise cursive. Subject 17 shows unprecedented bonding with human test subject PC. Frank read aloud, his voice cracking on his son's initials. The serum derived from wolf pituitary glands induces perfect obedience in hybrid subjects. Vivian turned a page and recoiled. Photographs of children, some with fur growing from their faces, others mid-transformation, their mouths frozen in silent screams. The final entry, PC has compromised the study. Terminate all subjects. Begin anew at Site B. The date, June 18, 2011. The day of the fire. The day Polly died stopping this. The seizure hit without warning. Kai collapsed, his body convulsing as something moved beneath his fur. His whimpers became words. "Dad. Hurts. Stop it." Polly's voice. Frank gathered the thrashing wolf, tears falling on golden fur that was receding, the paws elongating, the muzzle flattening, then stillness. The creature in Frank's arms was neither wolf nor boy, but something in between. Its eyes opened. Polly's eyes. "I held on," it rasped. "For you." Frank's heart shattered. 12 years. His boy had been here, trapped between forms, waiting. Outside, the howling began, a chorus of lost children crying for vengeance. The cave walls seemed to pulse as Frank cradled his son's twisted form. 12 years of grief and rage boiled over. He remembered Polly's laughter, his terrible guitar playing, the way he'd begged for a dog every Christmas. Vivian's hand on his shoulder brought him back. "Frank," she whispered, pointing. The hybrids had formed a circle around them, their eyes glowing in the dark, not threatening, protecting. The largest one, Tommy, stepped forward, dropping a gasoline can at Frank's feet, just like the one from Polly's journal, just like the fire that started it all. Kai Polly looked up at his father with those golden eyes. "End it," he pleaded. Outside, engines roared. Grange's men were coming. And this time, Frank wouldn't fail. Frank's fingers tightened around the can, the metal biting into his palm. 12 years ago, Polly had done this alone, just a boy against monsters. Now, the hybrids watched Frank, their golden eyes reflecting the flickering flashlight. "Kai," Polly whimpered in his half-form, his clawed hand gripping Frank's sleeve. "We burn it all," Vivian whispered, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. Outside, truck doors slammed. Boots crunched snow. Frank hesitated only a second. Then he began pouring, the gasoline splashing over surgical tables, over the children's drawings, over the nightmare that had stolen his son. The first match flickered in his shaking hand. The flame kissed the gasoline with a whoosh, fire racing along the floor like a living thing. The hybrids bolted for the cave entrance, their howls twisting into something almost human. Frank scooped up Kai Polly, his son's body too light, too wrong in his arms. Vivian grabbed the journal, its pages fluttering like wounded birds. The fire roared behind them as they stumbled into the night, just as headlights pinned them in place. A man stepped out, his face shadowed by a fur-lined hood. "Dr. Grange." His voice cut through the chaos. "You always were sentimental." The crack of the rifle sent Frank diving, shielding Kai Polly with his body. But the pain never came. Instead, a guttural snarl erupted. Tommy, the largest hybrid, lunging at Grange with fangs bared. The gun fired again. Tommy crumpled. Then the pack moved, a blur of fur and fury. Frank didn't wait. He ran, Vivian at his side, Kai Polly's ragged breaths hot against his neck. Behind them, screams, human and not, mixed with the fire's roar. The trees swallowed them just as an explosion lit the sky. The cave, the evidence, Grange's legacy, gone. But in Frank's arms, the worst remained. His boy, slipping further away with every step. Martha's quilt still smelled like her when Frank laid Kai Polly on it. The boy wolf's breathing was shallow, his fingers, too long, too clawed, twitching. Vivian worked in silence, cleaning wounds that seemed to shift under her touch. Frank stared at the photo on the nightstand. Polly at 10, grinning with a fishing rod. The same smile flickered on Kai Polly's distorted face. "Dad," he rasped, his voice a broken thing. "I tried to come home." Frank's tears fell on the quilt, darkening the fabric. Outside, the hybrids gathered, their eyes glowing in the dark, waiting, watching, protecting what little was left. Dawn painted the sky when the old woman appeared. Trapper Ike's mother, Vivian, whispered, a woman the town called the Witch of Wolverine Creek. She knelt beside Kai Polly, her gnarled hands hovering over his chest. "The wolf and the boy are at war," she murmured. "Only one can survive." Frank's voice broke. "Save my son." The woman's eyes, gold like Kai's, locked onto his. "It will cost you." Behind her, the hybrids paced. One by one, they stepped forward, bowing their heads, offering themselves. The old woman nodded. "The pack has chosen." She pressed a vial into Frank's hand. "Midnight, the river, and say goodbye." The river ice groaned underfoot as Frank carried Kai Polly to the center. The vial's liquid shimmered, wolf's blood and something darker. The hybrids formed a circle, their howls rising into the night. Kai Polly's fingers tightened on Frank's coat. "Will I remember you?" Frank choked. The old woman's voice carried on the wind. "Love doesn't forget." He uncorked the vial, drank, The pain was instant, bones cracking, skin burning. But when he looked down, Kai Pauli was smiling. Really smiling. "Dad," he whispered. Then the river ice gave way, and the water took them both. Vivian's scream echoed across the bank as the river spat Frank out. He gasped, clawing at the ice, his hands human, his body his own. But the current had taken Kai Pauli. The hybrids wailed. Then, a splash. A wolf emerged, golden-eyed and strong, shaking water from its fur. Kai, but different, older, wise. He nuzzled Frank's cheek once before turning to the pack. Their howls shook the trees. And in that sound, Frank heard it. Polly's laugh, bright and clear, carried on the wind. The old woman touched his shoulder. He's free now. The old sawmill's charred remains still smoked when Frank nailed the new sign over the gate. Polly's Haven. Inside, the hybrids lounged in sunlight, no longer twisted, just wolves with two knowing eyes. Kai lay at the center, watching his children from town crept closer, drawn by some unspoken call. Vivian handed Frank a coffee, her fingers brushing his. "He's still here," she murmured. Frank nodded, because when the wind rustled the leaves, it sounded like whispering. And sometimes, at dusk, the wolves' howls formed words. Frank woke to the creak of wood. Martha's chair swayed on the porch, empty but for a single wolf's paw print in the dust. He reached out, touching the fabric, still warm. Behind him, Kai whined, his ears pricked toward the tree line. Frank didn't need to look. He knew what he'd see. A shadow with Polly's grin, a boy running with wolves. The first snowflakes of winter began to fall as the chair stilled. Somewhere, a radio crackled to life. "Happy birthday, son." Static swallowed the rest. Years later, when Frank's hair was white and Vivian's hands were wrinkled, the sanctuary thrived. Kids came to hear stories about the boy who became a legend. The wolves never aged, never left, and every winter solstice, when the northern lights danced, the pack would raise their voices, and for one breathless moment, the wind carried two howls. One wolf, one human, together. Frank would smile then, his heart light, and whisper to the empty chair beside him, "I kept my promise." Little Sarah Jepson was only 7 when she wandered into the sanctuary's wolf pen. The townsfolk screamed, rushing to pull her back. But Frank watched in awe as Kai lowered his massive head to her level. Sarah placed her palm on his muzzle, her eyes widening. "He says his name is Paul," she whispered. The crowd fell silent. Sarah's mother collapsed to her knees. Her daughter hadn't spoken since Grange's men took her brother 2 winters prior. That night, under a full moon, Sarah sat cross-legged amidst the pack, translating their growls into stories of the boy who burned the bad place down. Frank's hands shook as he listened. His son was still saving children. Vivian's fingers trembled as she flipped through the waterlogged ledger she'd salvaged from the riverbank. "Site B," she read aloud, her voice cracking. The pages listed coordinates and names. So many names. Frank's breath caught at the bottom. Asterisk, P.C. Termination incomplete. Asset 17 compromised. Asterisk, a map showed a facility 200 miles north, labeled Phase 2. Kai growled, his golden eyes fixed on the horizon. The other wolves paced, their hackles raised. Frank traced the paper's edge, where Polly had scribbled in childish handwriting, "Dad, there's more of us." The sanctuary's wolves weren't the last, and Grange's people were still out there. Frank woke to silence. No paws patting on hardwood. No warm breath at the foot of his bed. The sanctuary gates hung open, the pens empty except for Sarah's red mitten lying in the snow. "Kai!" Frank's shout echoed uselessly. Tire tracks led north, fresh, deep grooves from heavy trucks. Vivian emerged from the clinic, her face ashen. They took Sarah too. Frank stumbled back into the cabin, reaching for his rifle, but stopped cold. On Polly's old bed lay a single Polaroid. Sarah, wide-eyed but unharmed, surrounded by wolves. Scrawled on the back, "We're going to finish it. Stay home, Dad." The handwriting was Polly's, but that was impossible. Frank ignored the note. He'd failed Polly once. He wouldn't fail Sarah. The snowmobile's headlight cut through the pre-dawn dark, revealing splashes of crimson every few miles. Wolf blood. Vivian clung to his back, her arms tight around his waist. At mile 47, they found the first body. A Grange mercenary, his throat torn out, his frozen face locked in terror. Frank recognized the tattoo on his wrist, the same symbol from the cave. The wolves had fought back, and judging by the bullet casings glittering in the snow, they'd paid dearly. A high-pitched whine cut through the trees. Frank veered off-road toward the sound, and found Milo dragging his hind leg, his fur matted with gore. The chain-link fence hummed with electricity. Beyond it, concrete bunkers sprawled under floodlights, and from within came the sounds. Not screams, howls, human-like but wrong, their pitch shifting mid-cry. Frank's stomach twisted. Vivian pressed binoculars into his hands. Through a barred window he saw them. Children in hospital gowns, their mouths too wide, their eyes reflecting the light like a wolf's. And there, at the center, Sarah, standing tall as a man in a lab coat, injected something into her arm. She didn't flinch. She smiled. Then, as if sensing Frank, she turned and waved. Behind her, shadows moved. Big shadows. The missing pack. And they weren't prisoners. They were hunting. Frank's bolt cutters snapped the lock. The corridor beyond stank of antiseptic and wet fur. Vivian covered her mouth as they passed cells. Empty except for claw marks and child-sized shackles. At the end loomed a steel door, its plaque tarnished but legible. Asterisk, subject 17 termination protocol pending. Asterisk. Frank's fingers brushed the handle, and a voice rang out from within. Took you long enough. A man's voice, Polly's cadence. The door swung open on its own, revealing a figure silhouetted against monitors showing Sarah's grinning face. The man turned. Frank's knees buckled. It was Polly, 25 years old, scarred but whole, his golden eyes gleaming. Hey, Dad. He tossed Frank a rifle. Let's go save your new kid. Polly moved like a soldier, his steps silent as he led them through vents. I didn't die in the fire, he murmured. I became it. The serum Grange injected him with had done more than bond him to wolves. It made him control them. That night 12 years ago, he'd set the blaze not to destroy evidence, but to free the others. But Grange had backup facilities, Polly spat. On the monitors, Sarah bared her teeth, now sharpened, at a cowering scientist. Frank's heart pounded. She's changing already, Vivian whispered. Polly nodded grimly. But she's the first who wanted it. A gunshot echoed below. Sarah's laughter followed. The hunt was on. The cafeteria was a war zone. Wolves, some half-transformed children, cornered the last mercenaries. Sarah perched on a table, licking blood from her claws. When she saw Frank, she beamed. Kai says you're sad. Don't be. She gestured to the other kids. We like it this way. Frank recoiled as a boy no older than 10 shifted mid-leap, taking down a guard. Polly gripped Frank's shoulder. They're not victims, Dad. They're upgrades. Vivian gasped, pointing to a screen. Asterisk, Phase 3 worldwide deployment. Asterisk. Grange hadn't been punished for his crimes. He'd been hired. By governments. By militaries. And these children, these weapons, were just the beginning. The detonator was cold in Frank's palm. The whole facility goes up in flames, Polly said. Just like last time. But his eyes flicked to Sarah, now curled asleep with Kai, her tiny fingers buried in his fur. Or we let them loose. Frank's throat tightened. These weren't mindless monsters. They were kids who'd never known safety. Vivian touched the detonator. There's a third option. On the monitors, a map flickered. Site C, Alaska Pipeline. Remote. Isolated. Perfect for a sanctuary. Polly smiled. The same reckless grin he'd had at 14. Wolf Mountain, Dad. Just like we talked about. Outside, engines roared. The cavalry was coming. But so was the pack. Frank never pulled the trigger. Instead, he opened the gates, and the children flowed out, a wave of fur and fury. The arriving soldiers barely had time to scream. Polly watched from the ridge, his face unreadable. They'll keep coming, he said. Frank nodded. Then we keep fighting. Sarah bounded up, her eyes glowing. Can we really have a mountain? Kai nuzzled Frank's hand, as if to say, we're family now. Vivian squeezed Frank's arm. Somewhere, Grange was still out there. But so were they. As the first snow began to fall, Frank tilted his head back and howled, a human sound full of wolfish promise. The pack answered, and for the first time in 12 years, Frank Carson wasn't afraid. The Anchorage Daily News headline screamed, "Wolf children terrorize rural Alaska." Frank crumpled the paper, staring at the photo beneath. Grainy security footage of Sarah leading the pack across a frozen river, her too-sharp smile gleaming. Vivian turned up the radio. Military deployment authorized to contain the hybrid threat. Outside, the sanctuary wolves paced restlessly. Paulie remained eerily calm, sharpening his knife. "They'll come for us first," he murmured. Frank's old hands trembled, not from fear, but fury. These were children. His gaze fell on Sarah, now curled asleep with Kai, her tiny fingers tangled in his fur. The same way Paulie used to clutch his stuffed wolf. The government saw weapons. Frank saw family. The black SUV arrived unannounced, its tires crunching over frost-rimed gravel. The man who stepped out wore a $3,000 suit and the same cold eyes as Dr. Grange, Senator Whitmore. Frank knew that face from news briefings about national security. The senator's polished smile didn't reach his eyes as he gestured to the dossier in his hand. "We know about Site C, Mr. Carson, and we're prepared to negotiate." Inside were blueprints, Wolf Mountain, exactly as Paulie had described. Vivian's breath hitched. "This is a trap." The senator's grin widened. "It's a solution. Contained. Controlled." Behind him, his aide clutched a briefcase. Something inside it thumped. The senator flipped the locks with theatrical slowness. Inside, a plexiglass box pulsed with blue light, and within it, a wolf pup, no bigger than Kai had been, its golden eyes dull with sedation. "Subject 53, Whitmore purred. "The first stable hybrid. Imagine an army that doesn't question orders." Frank's vision swam. The pup's paws were too human, its whimpers forming words, "H help." Paulie moved first, his knife at the senator's throat before guards could react. "You took another kid." Whitmore didn't flinch. "We took dozens. And if you want to save them." His gaze slid to Sarah, now awake and snarling in the doorway. The ultimatum hung in the cabin's thick air: lead the pack to Wolf Mountain, or watch more children become experiments. Vivian gripped Frank's arm. "We can run." But the senator had anticipated that. On the TV, news footage showed troops encircling Pinecrest. For their safety, Whitmore lied smoothly. Outside, Sarah crouched beside the sedated pup, her claws unsheathed. "We can eat them," she whispered. Frank's stomach turned, not at her words, at the relief he felt hearing them. Paulie met his eyes and nodded. The decision was made. Frank straightened his spine, the old ranger authority rolling off him like a storm front. "We'll go, but on our terms." The senator's smile. Armored vehicles flanked the wolves' transport like a funeral procession. Frank rode shotgun, watching Sarah through the rearview, her nose pressed to the glass as snow-capped peaks loomed. "Is it really a mountain just for us?" she asked. The soldier driving tensed. Paulie answered from the shadows. "For now." Wolf Mountain wasn't a sanctuary. It was a gilded cage, electrified fences, surveillance towers, and labs hidden beneath rustic lodges. Frank counted the guards, 28 visible. The weapons, sniper nests. The weaknesses, none. Then the pup in Vivian's lap stirred, whispering something that made her go pale. "The tunnels? They don't know about the tunnels." Outside, the first snowflake landed on the windshield. By morning, it would be a blizzard. The facility was a lie. Wolf Mountain hid something far older. A massive underground bunker from the Cold War, its walls scarred with older claw marks. "We're not the first," Paulie breathed, running fingers over etchings of wolf men hunting soldiers. Sarah darted ahead, her excited shouts echoing. "There's beds! And toys!" Frank's flashlight revealed a child's drawing taped to a rusted door. A stick-figure family with fangs. Vivian knelt beside a dusty journal. Test Group Alpha shows promise? Until the change. The date? 1962. The sedated pup suddenly yowled, thrashing in her arms. From the darkness beyond came answering cries. They weren't alone down here, and whatever shared those tunnels remembered the humans. The first thing emerged on two long limbs, its matted fur streaked with gray. Then another, and another. Not wolves, not men. Something in between, their eyes milky with age but sharp with recognition. Sarah didn't run. She bowed. The alpha, a massive hybrid with a shock of white fur like a senator's hair, sniffed her, then turned to Frank. "Carson," it rasped. Frank staggered back. "How do you know my?" The creature grinned, revealing yellowed fangs. "We knew your father." Behind them, the senator's men shouted as ancient ventilation systems roared to life. The alpha's ears pricked. The real experiment begins now. The lights failed, and in the dark, the howling started. Whitmore's scream cut through the radio static. "Contain them. Kanta." The transmission dissolved into wet crunching. Frank herded the children deeper into the tunnels, Vivian clutching the revived pup. Polly stayed behind, his eyes gleaming like the alpha's. "Go," he ordered. "This is our fight now." Sarah refused to leave, her tiny hand in Frank's. "But they're family," she pleaded. Above them, the mountain trembled, not from explosions, but from movement. The original hybrids were free, and they'd been waiting decades for revenge. The last thing Frank saw before the tunnel collapsed was Polly shifting, his bones cracking into a form larger than before. Not a wolf. Something new. Frank woke to sunlight and silence. The tunnel exit had dumped them into a pristine valley. No fences, no towers. Just wilderness. Sarah slept against Kai, the pup now healthy and yipping playfully. Vivian's fingers laced with Frank's as they watched the tree line. For 3 days they waited. Then, on the morning of the winter solstice, the shadows moved. The original hybrids emerged first, their fur streaked with ash and blood. And behind them, Polly, human again but for his golden eyes. "It's done," he said simply. Sarah launched herself into his arms. Frank didn't ask for details. The absence of helicopters was answer enough. That night, under the northern lights, the howls began. A chorus of old and new, human and wolf, past and future. Years later, tourists whispered about the valley where wolves played with children, about the old ranger and his wife who guarded them, about the man with golden eyes seen only at dusk. Frank's hair was white now, his steps slow, but the sanctuary thrived. On winter nights, he'd sit on the porch, Martha's empty chair rocking beside him. The wind carried voices sometimes. Polly's laugh, Sarah's songs, Vivian's scolding tone. And when the northern lights blazed brightest, the wolves would raise their muzzles and sing, their voices blending into something almost human. Frank would close his eyes and smile. Some promises, it turned out, even death couldn't break.